Don't focus on best in class. There's a real delicate balance.
If you always put the client experience at the forefront, you will make good decisions.
When chaos hits, you need to have a playbook.
I love seeing a familiar face in the intro that's joining me again today. Welcome everyone to the February Fireside Chat. Yes, we're already 2 months into the year, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about QBRs. I kind of laugh and call that the "What have you done for me lately" report, that in the world where IT works, folks wonder why they continue to pay you. When it doesn't work, they wonder the same thing. The way to get around some of that uncomfortable conversation is definitely regular updates with your customers. So I have three amazing panelists with me today who are going to talk about how they've implemented that in their business, how they're doing them currently, and more importantly, how they keep those customers engaged in those conversations and wanting to come to them. So I'm going to have them go ahead and introduce themselves and we'll get this started. Net, because you're my repeat, can I start with you today?
Of course. Hey, Becky. Hey, team. Thanks for having me. I'm Net Lynch. I'm the CISO at Kraft Kennedy, and also the Emperor of Legion. So Kraft Kennedy is an MSP that's been in the legal vertical for almost 40 years. And I joined about going on 2 years ago and launched a new division, and we focus on left of boom cybersecurity through MSP partnerships.
Awesome. Emperor of Legion is the best title ever. Jason.
Thanks. I'm Jason Vanson with Right Hand Technology Group. We're out of Pittsburgh. We're very heavily focused on CMMC compliance. So we work with clients in the DoD supply chain, really driving cybersecurity governance and compliance. But I always like to say we're tying together the IT to cybersecurity and the compliance and giving you one throat to choke.
Nice. Thank you for joining today. I've had you on live panels before. I think this is your first time though on Fireside Chat. So
correct.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And Martin.
Thank you, Becky. Thank you for having me. My name is Martin Hall. I'm a VCIO at Sterling Technology. We are an MSP based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Common break it, fix it, retainer fees, compliance, ranging anywhere from CPA firms to healthcare. We touch a little bit of everything. So
that's all right. So we've got kind of three very unique verticals here, still covering customer conversations on a regular basis. So we're going to start today with a poll. So if you guys can answer poll question 1, this will just kind of give us a pivot point of where to go from here. But let's start a bit on like just a general, why are these reviews important? Net, you had a really good point as we were doing a little bit of prep on the importance of level setting and expectations with clients.
Yeah, so I actually don't love the term QBR because it shouldn't be a review. It should be strategic looking forward, right? And, I mean, it's me, it's my opinion, whatever, but I feel like if you use a term like quarterly business review, you've got business in there, which is nice. Quarterly is your cadence, but review is looking backwards. This is what we've done. And yes, you need to do some of that in order to continually show your value and make sure that, the client is aligned with the expectations you have, et cetera. But a VCIO should always be strategic and forward looking. If you're talking about today and the past, that's really more of an account manager role. So to me, it's more like a strategic meeting of some strategic technology meeting, strategic business meeting, name it whatever you like. But so a little pet peeve of mine, but for the sake of this simplification, we'll call it a QBR. But setting the right expectations with your client is super important, right? What you're going to cover, what's important to them, not just what's important to you, and making sure that the agenda that you have, like a lot of people start with a templated agenda, which is fine. We like standardization, and in this industry, we really need it. So having something to start with, but then going through alignment. One of the things I used to do when I was a VCIO and VCSO, at the end of my first maybe 3 or 4 meetings with a new client, I would ask them, what did you like about this meeting that you want me to do more of? What did you not like that I should do less of? And what did I not do that you would like to see? And after about 3 or 4 meetings, And going through that process, you really understand what's important to them. So when you have your meetings, you're touching on the things that bring them value, as well as whatever your initiatives are that you need to bring to their attention. One other thing that I should mention is sooner than later, you should have the conversation with clients about whose responsibility it is to do what. A lot of times clients will say, you're my MSP, that's your responsibility, and kind of try to hand that off, try to, hand off the responsibility, the risk, everything that goes with IT and security to the MSP. And in reality, they can't, because we're not decision makers in their organization. So using something like the shared responsibility matrix is really helpful sooner than later in having that conversation. Even if you're not having strategic conversations with your client for whatever reason, whenever you're onboarding a new client, or maybe at a contract renewal time, that's always a good time to bring that up if you haven't already.
Shameless plug, Huntress Partners, non-Huntress Partners. We actually built a shared responsibility matrix for you, especially if you're starting that CMMC journey. So we built it as part of our CMMC readiness for you, but there is a template out there if it's something you're not doing today and need some inspiration. Jason, you call them something completely different as well.
Yeah,
What do you call your not QBRs?
Yeah, so we call them cybersecurity steering committee meetings. And we, again, kind of setting the expectations. We're setting the expectation all the way in the sales process. So when we're going through the sales process, we're trying to get the leadership team involved from the beginning in the sales process to make sure we're talking to each of them and figure out obviously what their role in the company is, what their challenges are. And then we're usually brought in again for CMMC compliance. So understanding how that affects their different areas and what their concerns are, but then making sure they realize, like, well, when this starts, we're going to have a steering committee. We want representation from across the company. I always like to say, listen, if you let cybersecurity people just put out what they want, you're not going to be able to log into your computer. So we need pushback between the different business units as we're, making recommendations. You might recommend something. It's like, well, that's not going to work because this is what sales does. And you need that interaction to make sure that the business goals and the IT and the cybersecurity goals are all in line. So that's why we call them steering committee meetings. And, same thing. We don't just look backwards. For us, we have a roadmap we're working from, and we talk about when we look backwards and say, did we get everything accomplished this quarter? We said we were going to get accomplished. Where are we currently at with compliance? Where are we going the next quarter? Because ultimately they want to see progress. That's what they're paying us for. So that's what we call them. And, it is kind of steering the compliance and the IT forward.
Nice. And Martin, what do you call them?
So we do call them QBRs, and the name is what it is just the name, but they can range depending on the client, right? While frameworks are great and they do help, I've found that the more you conduct it with certain clients, they want different things, right? Every business, every client has different needs, wishes, and wants. So they will kind of vary. To them, it seems like it's just a name on a Teams invite or a calendar invite whenever we send it out. But we do utilize this time to sit down with decision makers and not to be interrupted, right? That can be a hard thing to do, track down decision makers, get one-on-one time with them. So at the end of the day, utilizing that one-on-one time with them that you have for 30 minutes to an hour is pretty critical, whatever way you cut it up, right? For compliance, for planning for the future, for budget reviews.
So Jason, you mentioned that this is definitely a part of your sales process. For those legacy folks that might have been around since before maybe any of you started doing this, how do you introduce this? If it's not something you were doing today, how would you introduce this to a legacy client that doesn't really want to hear from you until they want to hear from you?
Yeah, I mean, that is a challenge. I guess we're kind of moving more into the CMMC, and so those legacy clients, are a little, maybe we don't do it as frequently. Maybe it's not a quarterly, or maybe it's not even a steering committee meeting. Maybe it's just an account review of going in and kind of talking about, just managing the life cycle of things is kind of a good place to start. Just understanding like what's coming up for renewal, machines are old, what ongoing issues that they have, and then going and talking about how you get the root causes and solve those. We just, it's the beginning of the year, but it was a great time towards the end of the year to introduce it, right? Because like, hey, we want to put together a budget for 2026 for you, and go through the, we kind of follow true methods as far as that goes. So going in and doing your gap analysis against IT best practices, or if we're doing compliance, CMMC, and then kind of presenting where they're at and our recommendations. I think where you get in trouble is if you just show up out of the blue to start your QBR program, you start immediately pitching all the stuff they need to buy, and then maybe you don't show up again for another 2 years or something. That's where, I mean, we've done that in the past. I'll be honest, we've done that. It's been a long time, but we've done that, and it's like, why don't they buy into this? And it's like, well, because we're just basically having quarterly sales meetings instead of QBRs.
I think that might be a common issue in some of these, is if every time you call me you want more money, I'm going to stop answering the phone. And so maybe starting with if you're not doing them today, don't treat them as a sales opportunity right out of the gate. And instead start with them being strategic business meetings and discovery of understanding what's important to the client. All of those pieces, and then you can eventually get to the sales thing. But if you think you're going to be selling it right out of the door, you're doing it wrong.
Yep.
Yeah, and like Jason was saying, like in Q3, Q4, when your budget time comes up, it's a fantastic time to introduce it, because not only are you helping them work on their budget, but the budget is forward looking. So those two kind of go hand in hand, and then doing a budget for a client is something that would generally fall under the purview of who's ever running the QBRs. And one of the things that I always advocate for is when you're doing budgets for your clients, two things. One, it should be at least 5 years, right? Because there's a lot that we can predict within 5 years. Most technology needs to be replaced every 3 to 5 years. You're going to have software that comes up for renewal, et cetera, in that time period. 5 years, you capture a tremendous amount. If you do 1 year at a time, you don't have the same vision to be able to say, well, let's move this here and let's move this here. And then your spend year over year will be a little more consistent year over year instead of having spikes. And the other thing is, it should be everything technology related, not just what they spend with you in your MSP. It should be their phone systems, their ISP, their copiers, their software, anything that falls under the category of technology. Say yes and put it on the budget. Let me tell you why. I had a client a few years ago that I was introducing this concept, and I uncovered that they were paying a tremendous amount for POTS lines, the plain old copper phone systems. Yeah. For their SCADA system. It was a municipality, and had conversation with them. They thought they had to have POTS lines. And because I had experience with other municipalities running SCADA systems, I knew that that particular system was able to run on something higher speed than that. So I was able to connect with the local ISP, get fiber put in, and I saved them so much money. Not only was it a year's worth of my services for my MSP, but also we did a refresh on all their PCs with the leftover money. As a government institution, they had to spend all their money that year. Let's do it. So I was able to, without changing the dollars in their budget, just moving it around, capture so much more of that. And the client was super happy, right? They got faster internet, they got rid of that enormous bill they hated paying, and they got all new workstations. So everybody won.
That's amazing. Like, what a great win. They're going to stay with you forever because you brought a ridiculous amount of value. And it was because you had a strategic business conversation with them, instead of, especially not just going in with your own agenda of, we're going to get you on new computers. Because if you had just went in and said, you know what, all your systems are really dated, we need to get this upgraded, they would have completely glazed over.
Exactly.
Martin, so thinking of how you run them, because again, everybody does this a little bit different. What is the right cadence as you're thinking of, I know QBR is the generic term and we all call them something different. Is every client getting a quarterly review? Is it somewhere in the middle?
Yeah, so my favorite answer for this episode might just be depends on the client, right? But it truly does depend on the client. Usually it's for us the size, right? For a shop that's 15 to 20 people, quarterly is not needed. Biannual would be just fine as well, right? And so it also depends on possibly their industry, if there's compliance methods. If it's a CPA firm, I won't talk to my CPA firms for the first quarter and a half, right? Because they're just nothing but taxes. So it really truly just depends on um, the client. But we will still do the back end work, right? Like update the budget for them, send them over information so that they can review it uh, at their leisure. And then we can bring it up and talk about it during our next QBR. And even though we're having the QBRs, we're still in constant contact with the people that are inside of the QBR, right? So we'll always have a pulse on what's going on with them. So it's not just once a quarter we're talking to them. That's all we talk to them, and that's it.
So you hit on a key point though of knowing the customer. So, a couple of you have mentioned end of the year is the best time to do this, but not everybody's budget cycle is January. So even asking that as a discovery question means that not all hope is lost. You don't necessarily have to wait until November to start these. There might be, those folks who do have different budget years. School districts definitely don't run that kind of a budget year. And also maybe getting them a bit better engaged by knowing their cycle of their business, like the CPA, exactly. Like you're not getting in with them, and if you can, they don't want to talk to you right now.
Yep.
So who delivers these inside of your organization?
That is the VCI role, right? So we will deliver these. We'll also put them together. We'll work on the client's budget, gathering invoices, right? So we can put everything together, compile it. And since we put it together, we are very familiar with how we put it together. And you mentioned something about starting QBRs. One thing I found is whenever you start them, less is better at first, right? Like a 5-year budgets are absolutely the way to go. But whenever you're first building a budget, it usually I found that it's better just to start with the year at first, let them chew on that for a little bit. Because with the clients that we've seen, most of them don't have a budget, right? And they're just paying invoices out left and right and with really no concept of where the money is going.
Yeah, there's a phrase that I say a lot, and that this is what Martin is saying is meet them where they are, right? We have a program, we have standards, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this client is in line with those standards. So absolutely, if they want to meet once a year, twice a year, they want to start with a 1-year budget, whatever makes sense for that relationship while you're still seeing forward movement and they're getting the value of this, absolutely, whatever makes sense for them.
Yeah, and I would I guess kind of point out, I know it's hard for MSPs, and it was hard for me a lot in the past of just like niching down. Because when you have a niche, you really understand their business, you're talking their language, you bring a lot more value because you're understanding more of their business outside just the IT stuff. But when you're treating everybody, when you take all comers, it gets very hard to get like that. So then you don't seem as valuable with the quarterly business reviews. And then the other thing, I kind of going back to the expectations, one of the things we do right off in the beginning is have the vCISO or the vCIO do their own business discovery. So we're doing a discovery, doing a sales call, but then like the first meeting with the client is tell me about your business, how it got started, how did you get here, how did you grow, who are your customers, who are your partners, a bunch of questions so you understand their business. And it kind of helps you put those risks and things in context as the more you understand about their business.
So thinking of that, do you kind of have a standard set of discovery questions that you ask a new client coming in so that you do understand a bit more about? Because no two CPA firms are even the same.
Yeah, we have a standard. We actually put it in my IT process so that we're always following the same questions. Then obviously now with Fireflies, we use Fireflies, it gets recorded and we document it all within IT Glue. We also really push for doing a business impact analysis, which is a little bit harder to get the buy-in and get it done, but we kind of fight our way through it. But again, it's going through the company and documenting all the business functions, what they depend on, what depends on them. You find out you have, something dependent on one person. And if obviously if something happens to that person, does the whole function stop? Again, all that stuff as you start working with them provides the context to explain, here's why you got to replace that machine, because if that machine goes down, your whole shop floor is down, and just let you put risk in context, business context versus, Jason just wants you to do this. I just want you to replace that, you know.
Jason told me to. It's my
Yeah.
favorite response. So let me just tack on to that something that Jason said about verticalizing. Like generally speaking, most MSPs start out as a generalist, right? You're trying to get your business going, but at some point, sometimes you end up with a few clients in one vertical. And one of the things that you start to notice is that they want to know what each other's doing. So if you, as their business partner, as their trusted advisor, can say, this is what I'm seeing other CPA firms doing. This is, how they're overcoming this problem that you're facing. That's valuable information because many of them don't really want to ask their peers because they see each other as competition, co-opetition, but they don't really get into how they solve problems, just that they have the same problems. And as I mentioned, Kraft Kennedy has been in the legal vertical. You've never heard of Kraft Kennedy, unless if you're a law firm, since 1988. I mean, that's the epitome of do one thing and do it well. The entire business was created to service law firms. And it was actually one of the owners still with the company today, Michael Kraft, very good friend of mine. He was a lawyer. And he found himself looking for his next thing. And he's like, there's such a gap in this industry that he built an MSP to give those services. And it's been hugely successful because of that, because they do one thing, do it well. There's a limited number of line of business applications that they use. Some of the technology is the same across the board, like Azure and 365, but the way that a certain vertical uses it is what's going to be different. And having that knowledge is invaluable to your partners.
But that also shows me the level of value you specifically have to bring to a QBR to a customer that bills in 7-minute increments. Like you've got to get in there, get right to the point and bring a ton of value right away. That gives me a whole different respect for your process of that. Okay, so we've got everybody interested. We're ready to tackle this. I've never done one before. This isn't something I'm doing. How do I make sure that I'm hitting it right out of the gate? How do I get the client interested before I even kind of walk in the room? Net, you called it setting the table, which I really liked that concept. How do you set the table before you're even in the room?
So I think initially when you're doing a QBR, like that's the time to talk strategy. But if they don't trust you yet at the trusted advisor level, it's all just blah, 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 you're selling me stuff, right? So in order to get past that or not get there to begin with is the relationship building. So really understanding the organization, what the different people in the organization do, where there's friction, the politics. We always have some people who, don't want to learn new technologies. They do something a certain way, and that's the only way they ever want to do it. And you need to know all these things, right? You need to know what their growth strategy is over the next 2 to 3 years. You need to know their staffing issues. These are not technology problems, they're business problems. And if you can show the business owner that you care about their business like they do, maybe not as much as they do because nobody will, but you care about it more than just as an income source for yourself or a revenue source for your MSP. You care about their success. Then when you're stepping into your QBR role, then you can show how your recommendations are aligning to their business goals. But you can't do that if you don't know what their business goals are, and they generally won't share them with you if they don't trust you. So first and foremost is that relationship. I usually say that bringing your VCIO or VCSO into the account as soon as it's signed is the ideal time because they're not ready for a QBR yet, right? It's probably at least going to be a quarter before you get to it because you have to do all the onboarding and all that. But it's the perfect time to do relationship building because you don't have the distraction. It's not really a distraction, but the distraction of strategy. It's talking about, I want to understand how your business works and how you as an individual works. And then once you have that, then rolling into your QBRs and you're going to already have a lot of their confidence.
Yeah, I think one of the things you said is that they got to trust you. I mean, like I always say that like business is not that hard. All you got to do is do what you said you were going to do on the time you said you were going to do it. So building that trust, I mean, if you're not fixing their problems, if they got tickets that are sitting there outstanding, you can't really just jump in and start doing QBR. It's like you got some relationship repair that needs to happen first. So I think that trust is like such a critical component because why would they reveal anything to you that, maybe is vulnerable in the business if they don't trust you?
Yeah, 100%. Let me share something with you. So a couple of years ago, I had a client who was doing, we're talking about CPAs a lot today, CPA as a service. And then it was a small business. He had, I don't know, 30 or so employees. He had a good book of business. He was rolling along. And he brought me on to help with a security strategy. And about a year or so into it, he had something very devastating happen. His is actually his COO, ended up starting a competing business and taking half his book of business.
Hmm.
Right? That is devastating to a business owner. We wouldn't want that to happen to us as MSP owners, right? And he got very vulnerable with me. We had a very strong relationship. We talked about the future of his company, things that he could do to compensate for it. And he's like, like we're talking all this strategy and then he just got really emotional. He was like, if he would have just come to me and said, I don't want to do this anymore, I want to start my own, I would have given him half my book. But the betrayal is what hurt so much. But he needed somebody to talk to who was removed enough from the day-to-day part of the business, but was at the same level of that could understand what he was going through. And it's really challenging for somebody to go through that, but to know that there's somebody next to him that says, I understand, you have every right to feel the way that you do. That is a betrayal. That isn't the right way to go about this. Okay, let's talk about recovering, right? And then getting him back on track about thinking about how to recover from it. And that wasn't a technical conversation, any bit of it. It was all about making his business healthy again. And, that was a significant component of the relationship that I had with him. And, that just, that he was able to get that vulnerable with me was significant.
Yeah, if
You
you
got,
didn't, oh, good. Sorry, Martin.
no, I was going to say, so you guys kind of hit it on the head with trust, right? And gaining trust is always difficult, super easy to break. One way that I found for a new client that we're on board, taking them lunch the first time, right? First QBR, taking them lunch, learn about their business, ask them to take you back to the office, walk around the office, see people, meet people, see how the operation works. If it's manufacturing place, you walk around, see how everything works, take pictures, and your next 2, 3 QBRs, you come back and say, hey, you guys are manufacturing. I saw this. This is your workflow, right? Here's where we're at. 2, 3, 4 QBRs later, you're actually able to dive into not fixing it, but providing the strategic guidance that these are meant for to begin with, right? We're meeting with real people. They all have personality traits. They all have certain things that they like and don't like. So as someone that's leading these meetings, it's your job to identify that and, making sure you're providing the best information in the best way you can. So thank you, Jason.
Yeah, no problem. No, I was just going to say the story that Ned told. I mean, think about one, when you bring recommendations now that they trust you that much that they revealed that. And then two, maybe you don't do it right then when they're telling you that, but like in the future, you're talking about role-based access control and zero trust and all these things to prevent those type of things from happening in the future. And Martin, you said something about, walking the shop floor and stuff. It kind of got me thinking about the engagement. Like if you can save them money in the beginning, like if you can, maybe your first QBRs are how you save them money and cut their costs. They're probably gonna be more engaged, like going forward. Like, hey, every time I meet with Martin, he saves me money. Let's meet again.
But you hit on a magical point. There's an absolute magic in breaking bread with people. It removes some barriers. It takes down the table in between you isn't a conference room table then. Like it just people are a lot more vulnerable and a lot more willing to talk over food. And breaking down some of those conversations about how do you make money? I mean, honestly, a lot of this kind of replicates what you should be talking about when you're building incident response plans as well, is, what are the things that you value the most in your business? And how can I, as your IT provider, help you protect those, make them better? Because they're going to unveil all sorts of hidden opportunity there just because you bothered to ask. I do like that lunch idea, and definitely so you did mention the being in the office. Where are these QBRs taking place? Are the majority of them over Zoom calls? Do you try and get to their office once a year? Like, Martin, what's your cadence for that?
For any office that's within a 3-hour drive, I'll be there. Right. And then anything outside of that, if they're in, 3, 4 states away, it will have to be remote. And they usually tend to still be remote. Maybe once every few years we'll go out there, unfortunately, but the cadence is always best in person, in my opinion.
Yeah, when I
Yeah.
was sitting in that seat, generally I would try to visit local clients late, just like Martin said, if they were local and available to get to, every meeting would be in person. But I did also had, like you had clients that were not so easy to get to. I would do twice a year. I would, that was part of my agreement with leadership is I have to be able to see my clients. And this is what I'm willing to do, right? You want me to keep this relationship. This is what matters. Exactly what Martin said about taking them out to lunch and showing them that I'm a person, you're a person. Let's connect on a human level, right? And what's more natural than breaking bread together? So twice a year, I would go to wherever they are and, have conversation with them. And then I would do other things like do a walkthrough, like, oh, we did such and such project. Let me go see how that went. Check the server room. While you're there, do it. I mean, it's nothing for us to walk through and just, do a visual check of a server room. Sometimes you find stuff, most of the time you don't, thankfully, right? Where did that come from? But it means something to the client. Like, you care that much about me. You came all the way over here just to spend the day with me. That's huge. And then, in between doing remote as you have to. I mean, this is the world we live in. There's a lot of companies now that don't even have an office, so we need to adjust to that. But making sure that they always feel like whenever you have a touch point, that it's valuable. It's not a box check.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty much along the same lines. With trying to get the whole leadership team into the steering committee, it gets more challenging to go on site because it's, again, half the people are hybrid or they're traveling or whatever it might be. So we tend to do more, in teams at this point. But yeah, there's nothing like seeing somebody in person. I drove out this week to a prospect like 4.5 hours away, and I was just like, man, it's so nice to be out of the office and shake hands with human beings and walk around that shop floor.
Mm-hmm.
It is nice to leave the space. Mine's the opposite. I travel a lot for work, so like I'm home today. I've been on the road all week. Like, I'm really happy to be here right now, but it is nice to get out of the space and meet people. So we do a lot of presentations at Huntress. We have the absolute joy of doing a lot of them in person, and there is nothing more uncomfortable than looking around the room and realizing that everyone you're talking to is completely disengaged from what you're saying. So how do you bring the conversation back when you can tell that the client has checked out?
So I acknowledge it. If I'm talking about something that's not hitting, I'll say something like, so I've been talking about this topic and, I want to make sure that I'm bringing value to you and we're using this time in the best way that we can. Is this a topic that you'd rather I stop talking about and we move on to X or move on to something else? Or what would you like to talk about? Because sometimes sometimes it's nothing to do with the meeting. Sometimes it's an external distraction. Like there's a fire they need to pay attention to, somebody else is handling it, but they have to keep tabs on it. You don't know unless if you ask. And you don't want to say, hey, you look distracted, but like you want to make sure that whatever content you're presenting to them is valuable to them. So I just come right out and say it. I just come right out and like, hey, do you want me to move on to something else? Do you think we've talked about this enough? And just get their reaction and sometimes just pivot from there. If I feel like it's something is on their mind and I don't have their attention, no matter what I'm talking about, I'll ask them like, hey, we haven't had a check-in a while. How are you doing? What's been going on with you? midway through a meeting, right? Doesn't matter if it's not in the beginning and the check-ins, like how are things really going with you? We talked about XYZ last time. How did you turn out with that? And just give them the microphone because they're going to talk about what's important to them. So without giving them a topic, giving them something very open-ended, what would you like to talk about?
Yeah, again, with us, with having the leadership team in the meeting, it gets a little easier because they're playing off of each other as well. So it's not just us talking to them. But also, I guess maybe should have mentioned this earlier, like we're looking to come out of there with decisions. So like, hey, let's make it, you're not paying attention. I need this decision made. And all of a sudden they're, front and center and they're going to make a call. That typically gets people paying attention when they have to make a decision.
Yeah, so for me, it depends on, I guess, what the subject is. There are just unfortunately some dry subjects, right? And I don't have the ability to make everything fun and uplifting and have everyone engage all the time, but it truly just depends on what's going on. If they're disengaged because it was a project that we dropped the ball on somewhere down the road, right? And they're disengaged because it brought back bad memories. If it's, like if there's a fire going on, it kind of depends on the current situation, but asking them a question around what you're talking about, I have found is usually the best way to get them back re-engaged. And from there, you can judge, they answer the question, they told us they weren't happy about the project. Okay, that's why they disengaged from this part. So.
Right. So let's go then. I think we're, oh geez, yeah, we're getting close to the end as this always happens. So one of the things that we said we would talk about on this call, and I do think it's important because it's something that I hear quite a bit in hallway conversations, is the importance of translating some of those really difficult metrics into executive language. So if we can get poll number 2 put up, how do you tailor your message to the audience? Knowing we've talked about that, it's important. It depends on who the audience is. How do you translate, Martin, to your point, some of those really boring things that, short of tap dancing, you're not going to make it more entertaining. How do you translate some of those better?
For me, it's business dollars, right? How does it affect the company financially? And it's scaring the client's never a good thing, and that's not what I'm, my intention here. But whenever it comes down to, dollars, it's usually easier to translate to the client. So.
Yeah, and for us, go ahead.
No, you can go ahead, Jason.
For us, we're usually brought in for cybersecurity and compliance, so we're always aligning the, again, mostly CMMC, so aligning the CMMC, and it's where are we? CMMC gives you the SPUR score, so you could just kind of like, here's our SPUR score this quarter, here's where we're at, here's the things we're working on, and where you'll be if we get these all done the next quarter, and you're kind of tracking that. It's gamifying it basically for them. So, and then if it's not CMMC, it's still just alignment with the framework. And then once we get them, fully aligned and certified, then each time we build out, compliance is people, process, and technology. So every one of those processes has an auditing function. So we audit those processes to make sure they're happening correctly. Some of them are us, some of them. And that's also reported. Like this quarter, we audited the new hire process and the termination process, and everything looked good. Or hey, HR didn't do it, this step right. We need to improve that. So it's really just telling them where we're at and how close we are to where they want to get to.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that understanding what's in it for them and answering that question is really helpful to create your message appropriately. So like if you're talking to a CFO, they care about a lot about financial impact. Is this going to affect our revenue? Are we going to have to spend more, right? So keeping the conversation tied to that for a CFO is great. A CRO is going to care more about how is this going to enable my sales? How can we make more sales because of this thing? Right? You're talking to a CEO, they care about exposure, they care about risk, they care about presenting to the board. Whatever their motivations are for engaging you should be what you're talking about. A lot of times, a lot of reports have an executive summary, which are great, but they're very generic to the executive level. So I would say if you're talking with different executives, create an executive summary for each of the executives in their functional area. It's going to mean a lot more to them specifically, and it's going to answer that question, what's in it for them.
I like that though, taking the time to just break down that summary based on the role of the reader, I think could be it takes it from that just generic too long didn't read summary that reads the same despite what your topic is, to be a bit more specific. So in the poll, folks said, we did ask them, when presenting to a client's executive team, what topic do you find the most difficult to translate in business language? And half the audience answered security and compliance frameworks. So what are your best tips to translate security and compliance frameworks into executive language that, I mean, if the CEO understands risk, where does that fit for everybody else? And this one's off script, so I know I threw a curveball in there. Sorry, guys.
I mean, I feel a little bit like CMMC tees this up kind of nice for us because it's tied to contracts. And if you're not CMMC certified, you don't get to keep playing in that space. So, example, I just met with this prospect on Tuesday and it's like, how many employees do you have? Okay. Based on that, I'm guessing you're about this revenue, which was the first time I tried that. So it's like a good technique is like, figure out what the relationship is, the employees, the revenue for the industry, and then just instead of saying what's your revenue, which they always don't want, simply don't want to answer during the sales process, you could just say, oh, so you're roughly about this much, and they're like, yeah, that's about right. And then from that standpoint, okay, well, how much is this tied? For us, how much of that's tied to DoD work? And then I have a number, and that's how much is at risk. So it kind of helps really drive that business case. And also let you explain your value because, you can't do this stuff cheaply. Like that's, everyone knows in the MSP space, there's always the guy that just threw his, got his briefcase yesterday and he's out charging next to nothing. But you can't deliver like that. You need to charge adequate to do all the stuff, to do proper QBRs and have the time to do the gap analysis and build out the roadmaps and game plans. And so for us, you want to understand what truly their business risk is. So if a server's down, what does that mean for, say, a shop, a manufacturing plant? How much is that? Like, how much is, if shop floor is down for an hour, what does that mean financially? And then you're able to start tying that to the risk.
Yeah, I would say when it comes to security and compliance, especially if they're in an unregulated industry, that doesn't really mean much to them. They're like, oh, it's some tech thing, right? And they don't really see what the benefit is to the company. And I think we have to be careful not to use fear, uncertainty, and doubt. When you use FUD, people don't enjoy those conversations and they try to avoid the next conversation because they don't like feeling that way, because we scare them. They're scare tactics and nobody really likes that. So staying away from FUD, but sharing what the risks are of not doing something versus the benefits of doing something. And again, if you're verticalized, you could also say, well, I worked with another company in your industry about your size and doing XYZ, we help them achieve this business goal, right? So using examples and telling stories is also very helpful. And it's easier to stay away from that FUD because you're helping them to visualize something and it's more positive than using FUD.
Yeah, fear it's a fine line, right? And telling a client what can happen without also scaring them, right? It's because if you don't present the risk fully, then in my opinion, not fully doing, your job. So that is always a fine line. For us, it's percentages, right? What is the risk percentage of this happening to them? What is the risk percentage for this? If the fix is, X, Y, and Z, but it doesn't match what the actual risk is, then it's not worth it to the client. But we'll also present that to them, right? So if we if we look back and say, oh, this tool is something that, they talked about, but it's not a great fit, we'll go over why it's not a great fit and why don't we recommend it. So in our QBRs, we talk about things that are good for them and things that we don't recommend that they have. So it's a mixture of both. So they know it's not always, every time I talk to Martin, it's a sales thing.
And I have to, we're at time, but I have to also believe that if every quarter you just come to me with FUD, that hasn't happened. It's the boy who cried wolf. Like, I'm going to quit listening to you. If every quarter you tell me the sky's falling and nothing's happened, like, All right, that's fine. You are just trying to sell me something. So thank you all for your time today, for your knowledge, for being so open and sharing how you do these things in your business. And I appreciate you all very much. We'll be back next month with another fireside chat. This time we're going to be talking about turning data into dollars and the importance of having really good data in your own business. Have a wonderful speaker coming in to talk about that. So please make sure you register for that. And otherwise, we will see you again very, very soon. Thank you all for joining us today.